Right now, over 200 million Americans are carrying a balance they cannot fully pay off. Not because they're careless, not because they're bad with money, but because of a system that was never designed to let them win. The average American household now owes more than $8,000 in credit card debt. And here's the part that should scare you. At today's interest rates, if that family only makes the minimum payment, it could take them almost 18 years to pay it off. 18 years. Paying for a dinner they had in 2026 until the year 2044. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this happens, who profits from it, and the one shift in thinking that can pull you out of the cycle for good. Because this isn't really a story about spending too much money. It's a story about how a multi-trillion-dollar industry was built on the assumption that most people will never fully escape. Stay with me, because the ending is going to change how you look at every card in your wallet. Let's start with why this topic matters right now, in 2026. Total credit card debt in the United States has crossed $1.17 trillion. That's not a typo. Trillion, with a T. And interest rates on those balances are sitting at some of the highest levels in over 3 decades, many cards charging over 20%, some over 30%. In this video, you're going to learn how debt actually multiplies behind the scenes, why smart, hardworking people still end up trapped, the psychological tricks built into your everyday spending, and the exact strategy that helped ordinary Americans break free without winning the lottery or getting a miracle raise. But first, we need to understand where this all begins. And it doesn't begin with a big mistake. It begins with something small. Section 1. The trap that looks like a gift. It usually starts innocently. A new credit card arrives in the mail. Maybe it comes with a shiny sign-up bonus. $200 back or 50,000 travel points, just for spending a few $1,000s in the first 3 months. It feels like free money. And for a moment, it is. But here's what most people don't realize. Credit card companies aren't handing out rewards because they like you. They're running a business, and that business is extremely profitable. In 2025 alone, credit card companies in the U.S. made over $130 billion in interest and fees from everyday consumers. That's not a side income. That is the entire business model. Think about it this way. If everyone paid their balance in full every single month, credit card companies would barely make any money. The interest is the product. You are not the customer buying a service. In a very real sense, your debt is the product being sold to investors. This is where things get interesting. Because the system isn't just profiting from debt. It's engineered to encourage it. Take the minimum payment. It sounds responsible, right? Pay at least the minimum, stay in good standing, avoid late fees. But minimum payments are often calculated to be just enough to keep you paying interest for years, sometimes decades, while barely touching what you actually owe. Here's a real example. Say you have a $5,000 balance on a card with a 22% interest rate. If you only pay the minimum, roughly 2% of the balance, you'll pay over $7,000 in interest alone before that debt is gone. You will have paid more in interest than the entire original amount you borrowed. That's the hidden truth. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. And the lesson here is simple. The minimum payment is not a safety net. It's a slow leak. Section 2. Why smart people still fall in. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but I'm careful. I don't overspend. Surely this couldn't happen to me. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some of the people who fall hardest into credit card debt are the most financially literate. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, business owners. Why? Because debt in America rarely starts with recklessness. It starts with a life event. A car breaks down. A medical bill arrives that insurance didn't fully cover. A layoff happens right after a mortgage payment is due. According to Federal Reserve data, nearly 40% of Americans say they couldn't cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing money or selling something. Let that sink in. $400. Not $4,000. $400. This is where the credit card becomes a lifeline instead of a luxury. And once that first emergency charge goes on the card, and it's not paid off immediately, a second one often follows. Then a third. Not because the person suddenly became irresponsible, but because the debt itself starts eating into the income that used to cover regular life. The interest payments quietly replace what used to be grocery money or savings money. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Debt doesn't usually explode all at once. It creeps, slowly, month by month. The minimum payments grow, the available credit shrinks, and the sense of control disappears so gradually that most people don't notice until they're already deep inside it. There's a term economists use for this. It's called the debt treadmill. You keep moving, keep paying, keep working just as hard, but you're not actually getting anywhere. The lesson here is uncomfortable but important. This isn't purely a math problem. It's a life shock problem. And the fix isn't just spend less. It's building a buffer before the shock happens. Section 3. The psychology they don't want you to notice. Now let's talk about something even more powerful than interest rates. Your brain. Credit card companies have spent decades studying human psychology, and they've built their entire experience around a few key discoveries. First, the pain of paying with a physical card, or worse, a tap or a phone screen, is dramatically lower than the pain of paying with cash. Researchers at MIT found that people are willing to spend up to 100% more when using a credit card compared to cash for the exact same purchase. Same person, same income, same want, just a different payment method, and they spend twice as much. Why? Because cash creates what psychologists call pain of paying. You physically watch money leave your hand. A credit card removes that friction entirely. The charge feels abstract. It doesn't feel real until the bill arrives weeks later, and by then, you've already made 10 other purchases the same way. Second, most people underestimate how debt compounds against them. We're wired to understand simple math. Spend $100, owe $100. But interest doesn't work in straight lines. It compounds. It grows on itself. A balance that isn't paid off doesn't just sit there waiting patiently. It multiplies, month after month, quietly getting larger even if you stop spending completely. This is the biggest mistake people make, and it comes from a very human place. We're taught to think about debt as a fixed number, but debt is a moving target that grows faster the longer you ignore it. Here's a myth worth breaking right now. The myth is that debt happens because people don't understand money. The reality is debt happens because the entire system is built to exploit normal human behavior. You are not failing a test you were taught to pass. You're playing a game with rules stacked against you, rules most people were never shown in the first place. The lesson from this section is this. Awareness is your first defense. Once you understand that the system profits from your convenience and your forgetfulness, you can start making choices that work against that design instead of falling into it. Section 4. The billionaire who saw it coming. Let's talk about someone who understood this system decades before most people did. Warren Buffett has said publicly, more than once, that he never carries a credit card balance, and that if he had, he probably wouldn't be nearly as wealthy today. In fact, Buffett has told a well-known story about lending money to family members at a lower interest rate than credit cards, specifically to get them to close out their high-interest balances. His logic was simple. There is no investment on earth that reliably returns 20% or more year after year. But credit card interest charges exactly that, or more, against you every single month you carry a balance. Think about that comparison for a second. The best investors in history, people who've built empires in the stock market, average returns of around 10% a year over the long run. Meanwhile, the average credit card interest rate in 2026 sits above 24%. That means carrying credit card debt is, mathematically, worse than almost any investment decision you could possibly make in the opposite direction. It's negative compounding, working against you at a rate most investments can't even match in your favor. This is the hidden truth billionaires understand instinctively, and most everyday consumers are never taught. Paying off high-interest debt isn't just a financial chore. It is, dollar for dollar, one of the best guaranteed returns available to an ordinary person. Nowhere else can you reliably earn 20+% with zero risk, except by eliminating a debt that charges you that much. Section 5. How the trap actually gets built, one small decision at a time. Let's walk through how this plays out in real life, because the pattern is remarkably consistent. It usually begins with what looks like a manageable balance. $1,000, maybe $2,000. The minimum payment feels small, $40 or $50 a month. Easy to handle alongside rent, groceries, gas. But then life happens again. Another expense. The balance grows. Now the minimum payment grows too. Slowly, that $50 becomes $80. Then $120. Meanwhile, take-home income hasn't changed. So something else has to give. Often it's savings. Sometimes it's a second card, opened just to help manage the first one. This is where many people unknowingly make the mistake that deepens the trap the most. Balance transfers and new cards can genuinely help, but only when paired with a real payoff plan. Without one, they simply spread the debt across more accounts, making it harder to track and easier to keep growing. Here's a number that puts this in perspective. The average American household with credit card debt is now juggling more than 3 separate cards at once. 3 different due dates, 3 different minimum payments, 3 different interest rates, most of them high. It becomes less like managing money and more like running a small, exhausting business just to keep the balances from spiraling. And this is exactly where the emotional toll begins. Debt isn't just a financial weight. Surveys consistently show that credit card debt is one of the leading sources of relationship stress and anxiety in American households. It affects sleep. It affects marriages. It affects how people show up at work. This isn't an exaggeration for effect. It's a well-documented pattern, and it's the real human cost behind that $1.17 trillion number we mentioned earlier. The lesson here is this. The trap isn't built by one bad decision. It's built by dozens of small, reasonable-feeling decisions that compound over time, the same way interest does. Section 6. The way out that actually works. So now the question everyone's been waiting for. How do people actually escape this? The good news is, thousands of ordinary Americans have done it, and the method isn't complicated. It's just uncomfortable, at least at first. The first step is seeing the full picture. Not guessing. Writing down every single balance, every interest rate, every minimum payment, in one place. This single act, just facing the real numbers, is often the hardest part, because most people carrying debt have never actually looked at the complete total. They've only ever looked at each bill separately. The second step is choosing a payoff strategy and sticking to it. There are 2 well-known approaches. The first is called the avalanche method, where you pay off the card with the highest interest rate first, while making minimum payments on everything else. Mathematically, this saves you the most money over time. The second is called the snowball method, where you pay off the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate, to build quick momentum and motivation. Research from behavioral finance studies has actually shown that for many people, the snowball method leads to higher success rates, not because the math is better, but because the psychological win of clearing a balance keeps people motivated to continue. Neither method is wrong. What matters most is picking one and actually following it, instead of jumping between strategies out of frustration. The third step, and this is the one most people skip, is addressing the behavior that created the debt in the first place. If someone pays off a credit card but never builds an emergency cushion, even a small one, a few $100s, they're often right back in the same position the next time life throws a surprise expense at them. This is why financial counselors consistently emphasize building even a tiny emergency fund alongside debt payoff, not after it. It breaks the cycle at its root cause. And finally, the fourth step is negotiation. Many people don't realize that credit card companies will sometimes lower your interest rate if you simply call and ask, especially if you've been a customer in good standing. It doesn't always work, but it costs nothing to try, and it can meaningfully speed up your payoff timeline. None of this is glamorous. There's no secret hack, no guaranteed shortcut, and anyone who promises you one is not being honest with you. But this approach, facing the numbers, choosing a method, building a small cushion, and asking for better terms, has helped real families climb out of 5 figures of debt, one steady month at a time. Section 7. The bigger picture. Zoom out for a second, because there's something important here beyond the individual story. The reason this cycle exists at scale, affecting hundreds of millions of people, isn't because an entire generation of Americans suddenly became bad at math. It's because the financial system around us was built, quite deliberately, to make spending easy and debt confusing. Low minimum payments, complex interest calculations, rewards that encourage more spending. It's not an accident. It's a business model. Understanding that shifts the entire conversation. This isn't about shame. It's about awareness. Once you see how the system is designed, you stop blaming yourself for falling into a trap that was built, quite literally, to be fallen into. And that shift in mindset alone changes how a person approaches every future dollar that passes through their hands. Now let's bring it all together. Here's what we've learned today. Credit card debt in America isn't primarily a story about irresponsible spending. It's a story about a business model that profits enormously from convenience, from small monthly payments, and from a psychological gap between spending and feeling the cost of that spending. We learned that minimum payments are designed to keep balances alive for years, sometimes decades. We learned that even financially savvy people fall into debt, usually triggered by a single unexpected life expense they weren't prepared for. We learned that paying with a card instead of cash can double how much a person spends without them even realizing it. We learned that eliminating high-interest debt is, mathematically, one of the best guaranteed financial moves a person can make, better than almost any investment return available. And we learned that escaping the cycle isn't about a miracle. It's about seeing the full picture, choosing one clear strategy, building a small cushion, and sticking with it long enough for the math to start working in your favor instead of against you. If there's one thing to take away from this video, it's this. Debt doesn't usually happen because someone made one big mistake. It happens because a system built on small, invisible advantages was allowed to run quietly in the background of someone's life for years. The moment you turn the lights on and actually look at that system, clearly, honestly, without shame, is the moment you take the power back. That's really what financial freedom comes down to. Not perfection, not luck, just clarity, one honest look at the numbers, and the discipline to keep choosing yourself over the convenience the system was counting on you never questioning. If this video helped you see credit card debt a little differently, subscribe for more videos about money, investing, and building wealth.